And welcome back everyone to our course in college algebra. Dr. Tom McNamara here, and in this video we are going to discuss the concept of finding extrema on a graph. So if you make an educated guess as to what extrema means, well, you can probably guess it deals with extreme. So in other words, like outliers. So extrema come in two varieties. You have maxima and you have minima. Maxima are high points on the graph, and minima are low points on the graph. And further, these guys come in two varieties: absolute and relative. When you're talking about absolute extrema, like an absolute maxima, that is the highest point anywhere on the graph. And similarly with an absolute minima, that would be the lowest point anywhere. On the graph. Whereas relative is the highest or lowest points in a region of the graph. So the graph may get higher someplace else if we're talking about a relative max. But if you're talking about an absolute maxima, then the graph never gets higher than that. Let's just do a quick example. Let's draw a curve here. So this is my graph, y equals f of x. In fact, let me be a little more specific, and I'll even put I'll put coordinates on these points right here. Let's say this is -2 comma -5. I'm christening that point -2 comma -5, and I'm going to make this point 2 comma 6. I'm going to make this point 4 comma 1. Just so I can refer to some concrete values. Okay, so these guys are both relative mins. This guy is an absolute min. Okay, this is the lowest point anywhere on the graph. This is a relative max, but not an absolute max. It's the highest point in this neighborhood, but as we can see over here, the graph is higher as well as over here. Okay, so the relative minima are -5 and 1. The absolute minima is y equals 1. And notice I'm talking about the y values here. When I say minima and maxima, we're talking about highest and lowest. Well, you got to be talking about the y-axis if you're talking about highest and lowest. Okay, so we have a, absolute min is not 1. The absolute min is -5. 1 is a relative min, not an absolute min. Okay, so for relative max, that'd be y equals 6. And absolute max, well, we don't have any. No absolute max. Okay, so pretty easy to spot these when you have a well-drawn graph. And that's all we're going to do in this class about relative extrema. Now, those of you that go on to take calculus next year or next semester, you'll talk about techniques for computing these values and figuring out how to draw a really good graph by finding the high points and the low points ahead of time. But for right now, we'll just worry about identifying them from these pictures, your absolute and relative extrema. Okay, so it's just high points and low points, and that's all.